Hello and welcome to tonight's philosophical show. My name is, for those that don't know yet, but we've been together I mean, it's already a 10th event ever since the beginning of the Corona crisis. Ever since we started to basically broadcast our events via Zoom, via Facebook. So my name is Gašper Pirc. I'm president of the Slovenian Philosophical Society, and as I said, this is the 10th event that we had in less than a year ever since the Corona crisis started. And it's also the 5th in our second series that we started with in this time, Philosophy in the Matrix. And I'm super glad that today we are being actually graced with the presence of a very interesting, a very a very provoking author, Ciprian Bogdan, who is also my friend. We met years ago at the Critical Theory conference in Rome. It was a great conference, and he already prepared had a very interesting talk back then. I think he's a really promising critical theorist, and especially because he is a Adornian scholar, but he tries to see the new solutions to the problems, and of course also tries to adapt the understanding of Theodor Adorno and his philosophy to today's current society and today's events. And this talk, I think, will also be very prominent in that regard, especially since he will try to connect Adornian philosophy with the question of social pathology, the question, of course, of social acceleration, a very intriguing and fairly well-known theory by Hartmut Rosa, which, of course, tries to kind of make this connection between sociology and philosophy. And in that regard, I'm especially pleased because out of all the events we've had so far in this series, this is probably the one that's closest to what I also study, what I also research. And while I've been, as Ciprian would say, I've been mostly working with second and third generation scholars or materials from these scholars in the past a few years. I was always very intrigued by the question, especially of social pathology, even with the first generation scholars. And so for me, this will be extremely interesting. This is what I need to say at the beginning. And and before I start, maybe we'll just give you a very brief information about our guest. Now, Ciprian Bogdan is a lecturer of political science at the Faculty of European Studies excuse me if I don't spell this right, Babeș-Bolyai, is this right, Ciprian?
Almost. It's okay.
University in Romania. I apologize for that. He is the author of several studies of the theoretical and political legacy of the Frankfurt School, and has recently published a book, How to Look at Ideology, a reconstruction of Theodor Adorno's social physiognomy. He's basically, this book was on Adorno's critique of ideology. And I think right now we will talk about something that is still quite connected, since we know that ideology is, of course, basically the generator of many of the what we call social pathologies. This is a very interesting term, a very intriguing term, and a very problematic term. I hope we will hear more about that. And without any further ado, I will now give the word to our guest, Ciprian. It's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gašper. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you, Gašper, for inviting me. In your introduction, I feel a bit ashamed because, okay, I will talk briefly about social pathology, but not that much. So please excuse me for this. And another thing, before starting, I also want to excuse myself in case I will distort the English language at some point, because I'm a bit tired, and in Romania it's already 9 o'clock. So bear with me. And if I do that, if you sense that I'm a bit, my English is wrong, is bad, please tell me. Okay. So I will try to present you. I will use PowerPoint because I think it's better this way. I mean, it allows you to have a better grasp on this on what I propose here. I will start by, let me first of all put my PowerPoint, and then we can start to talk. So I will start with something personal. I remember at the very beginning of this pandemic, in the first few weeks, that I felt a sense of relief because, everything stopped in a sense, right? I mean, we didn't have to go, to meet our deadlines. The life, in a sense, stopped. We had to move to stay in our homes and so on and so forth. And I believe that many of us had this kind of feeling. I'm sure that I was not alone in that feeling. And I really believe it is related to this to acceleration or social acceleration. I mean, I really believe that we are caught in this hamster wheel in which we have to, to meet various daily deadlines, and this puts a lot of pressure on us. And this pandemic seemed, at least in the first phase, to put an end, or at least to suspend this kind of mad way of life. Okay. Okay, I think we can now turn to what I would like to present today. Namely, I would like to start with a few words to create some sort of context for acceleration, and then talk a bit about Hartmut Rosa, and later on I will talk, of course, about I will try to focus on Adorno. So first of all, social acceleration as a topic started to be considered as something very important, as a central feature of modernity already at the end of 19th century. There are various authors that try to address the problem. Henry Adams talked about the law of has a text on law of acceleration. Sorry, the famous German sociologist Georg Simmel also had reflections on the topic. The Italian artist and fascist Filippo Marinetti also was drawn by this idea. However, lately, in the last decades, a growing literature tried to address this topic. Of course, Reinhard Koselleck is among the most important scholars who talked about the social acceleration. Others like Hermann Lübe, Paulo Virilio, Sloterdijk, Scheuermann, Hartmut Rosa, of course. I will talk about him in a moment. So there is a growing literature on this topic, and that says something. That says that this topic really touches a nerve. I mean, it is seeming very. I mean, it seems to us already very pressing. And I already gave you my personal experience on that. Okay, now focusing on Rosa's approach, Hartmut Rosa's approach, that was condensed, synthesized in his book Social Acceleration: A New Theory of Modernity, which appeared in German in 2005, if I remember well, and was translated in 2013 in English. This is an interesting book because it is the first, or among the first, systematic approaches, to address social acceleration by using the lenses of a critical theoretical approach. So Rosa is not only interested in the mechanism that creates social acceleration, but also, and here I go to what Gašper said, to the social pathologies generated by it. Okay, and that's why he said at some point that by understanding social acceleration and the pathologies created, we can renew the critique of alienation that is a basic feature of critical theory. Okay, so I try in this part to talk a bit about Rosa. I believe that Rosa tries to go beyond, for instance, Reinhard Koselleck's analysis of Reinhard Koselleck tried to point out how modernity at some point decoupled the idea of progress with the idea of acceleration. Progress, as Koselleck says at some point, is about optimization and improvement, while acceleration is different because it's about exponential change. Okay, it's about exponential change. So Rosa starts by pointing out that this decoupling between progress and acceleration is already widespread, And basically, the modern emancipatory project ends up in, according to Rosa, various forms of blind acceleration. Rosa goes as far as to say that he proposes this concept, dynamic stabilization, by which he means that in our contemporary modern capitalist society, the point is to accelerate only in order to secure what we already have, only to secure the current position, and not to gain something. I mean, I don't know, to produce some sort of qualitative change, but simply to preserve the status quo, if you want. According to Rosa, modernization has been viewed as individualization, rationalization, differentiation, both functional and structural, and of course, the instrumental domestication of nature. Of course, here he thinks about Adorno and the early generation of critical theory. According to him, acceleration actually is a feature that runs through all these dimensions. Okay, so it's something that is transversal to all these dimensions. According to him, modern society should be understood holistically as an internally differentiated totality. However, he believes, unlike, for instance, other critical theorists, Adorno included here, not Habermas, that acceleration has behind several, I mean, causes or motors. This is his own words. For instance, he believes that acceleration is determined, for instance, by the capitalist tendency towards profit. Of course, this is the Marxist legacy. By the cultural ideal of accumulating as many experiences as possible. This also has long Western roots. It goes back to even Christianity and so on and so forth. And the last one is the structural factor of social differentiation. This structural factor is about Niklas Luhmann, an important German sociologist, who said that modernity is basically about social differentiation. Because we have complexity, we also need this functional differentiation. So by using this kind of approach, Rosa believes that acceleration should not be viewed as something homogeneous. It is not something that is impacting society in the same way, but it's a heterogeneous phenomenon. We also have not only acceleration, but we might have forms of deceleration or slowing down. So we have to be careful in order not to paint a too uniform image of this modernity, according to Rosa. And now, because we talked about pathologies, social acceleration generates, according to Rosa, a host of pathologies. I will not try to describe them all because it would take too long. I will simply focus, for instance, on fragmentation. We know that, for instance, postmodernism debated a lot around concept like multiple identities. For Rosa, this postmodern approach can be easily understood as being as a form of as being shaped or impacted by acceleration. Why is that? Because acceleration inhibits the possibility to create some sort of relationship between past, present, and future experiences that would allow individuals or collectivities to create a narrative. Okay, so fragmentation, according to him, can be related to social acceleration. The same can be said about this desynchronization that can be, for instance, visible in the fact that there is that certain social spheres are much slower, for instance, than other social spheres. One example provided by Rosa is the political field. Politics is much slower, for instance, than economic field. Politicians have to debate, have to to vote, to create some sort of consensus, or at least some sort of majority, in order to impose some certain laws, while economic processes are much faster than that. And often politics, has this problem because it simply tries to react to what already happened. Other problem concerning the desynchronization, for instance, is the fact that certain groups can be very highly adapted to acceleration. For instance, we might think about middle class, right? Urban middle classes that know how to use computers, have access to various knowledges, and other groups, for instance, rural communities that are cut off from this process. And of course, this comes also with forms of discrimination and forms of, I don't know, exclusion and so on. Okay, and another important effect mentioned by Rosa is the fact that because of this acceleration, there is also a widespread frenetic, I use his words, standstill or polar inertia, in which everything seems to collapse into a present moment, bearing no relation with other present moments. So what is interesting here, and even ironical, because of this kind of inertia, this kind of presentistic, if you want, attitude that we have because of social acceleration, the only remaining meta-narrative that might still connect past, present, and future is that of an approaching catastrophe or an end of history. So basically, catastrophism that we can see around us is some sort of it offers us some sort of Archimedean point, you know, that allows us to put together all these very fragmented experience that we have. So this is the last chance to create some sort of meaning out of these very fragmented moments. Okay, so this is very briefly, I mean, very sketchy. Rosa's approach. I left many things aside, many other aspects aside. The time is pretty short, and I try to be brief. So I will now try to focus on Adorno. What is interesting about this is that Rosa himself, at some point, page 316 in Social Acceleration, approvingly cites one of Adorno's attempts to sketch the profile of an emancipated society. And I quote here, this is actually a quote from Minima Moralia, but a quote that Rosa himself quotes, okay? A truly emancipated society as that which will grow tired of its development and out of freedom leave possibilities unused, instead of storming distant stars under a confused compulsion. So I will start from here. So Rosa himself is aware that Adorno has something to say about acceleration. He even mentioned, I mean, in this very short quote is also a very important concept that I will go back to, compulsion. So I will start from here, and then I will try to clarify my approach. I might also need to say that there are already some studies trying to tackle the problem of social acceleration in Adorno's work. I will mention only two of them here. For instance, Espen Hammer, who talked in Experience and Temporality about briefly about this, but also Terence Holden, Adorno and Arendt, Transitional Regimes of Historicity. But I think my approach is a bit different from theirs. So if you look at the articles, you will see the difference. I have three main objectives in my presentation. In the first one, I will try to relate Adorno's view on social acceleration with his reflections on the dialectics between history and nature. I really believe I will try to show that we cannot understand social acceleration without also tackling the problem of these dialectics. The second thing I want to talk about, of course, is to describe Adorno's understanding of the relationship between capitalism and social acceleration. We will see that for Adorno, these two are connected, and we'll see that this is also related to the Marxist heritage of early critical theory. And I also believe that in order to understand this relationship, better understand this relationship, we need the concept of compulsion. I believe that this can be enlightening for us. And in the last part, I very briefly, actually, this is more of an attempt to, to have more discussions about it. I didn't offer a very clear-cut and very sophisticated account. I just want to propose this topic, climate change, as a possible example of the intersection between history, nature, and acceleration from an Adornian perspective. And in conclusions, I will try to briefly compare Rosa and Adorno. So those are my intentions. I now would like to focus on the dialectics between history and nature. And I will start by mentioning a rather obscure text written by Adorno, The Idea of Natural History. Adorno himself had some problems in accepting this text or publishing this text later on, but that's not a concern for us here. I believe that in this very small text, he manages actually to synthesize many ideas that he actually tried to develop further in his later work. So that's why I believe this text is important. In this text, Adorno says that his main intention is to dialectically overcome the usual antithesis of nature and history. So basically, he wants to say that we have to move beyond the traditional view of viewing nature as timeless. We still have this with science. Science is, at least certain scientists might have this kind of approach, of course, having mathematics behind them. And history, of course, viewed as an artificial construction. So we have this kind of opposition that Adorno wants to go beyond. And in doing this, he tries to offer a very sketchy definition, if I might say so, of nature and what he means by nature and history. It's a pretty idiosyncratic approach. He believes that nature is not about what science thinks or what the usual scientific approach. So nature is, according to him, what appears to us as a quantitative process. I quote here, the mere reproduction of what has always been. And he creates this analogy between nature and myth. I don't go into many details here. We can do that maybe in our talks. While history, according to him, means the mode of conduct established by tradition that is characterized primarily by the occurrence of the qualitatively new. Now, what is interesting, how Adorno wants to overcome this dualism, because at this point we have this distinction. Nature, on one hand, is it's repetition, if you want, while history tends to bring to generate newness at the level of to bring new in the world. So there is a difference here. However, there is something fundamental that unites these two realms, and that is an idea taken from Walter Benjamin, namely transience. Transience is, in a sense, if we try to synthesize things to the utmost, implies both finitude and mortality, but also transformation or transgression. I really believe, but this is another discussion, that transience is another word for non-identity. So in a sense, what transience is, according to Adorno, or in my interpretation, is a crossing point, I would say. Transience allows for both the difference and the relationship between nature and history. If you want a very crude analogy, we might think of transience as expressing, the empty center in an intersection. You have an intersection, and for instance, imagine cars. I know it's a very crude analogy, so excuse me for that. But in order for cars to go, you have to no one can, occupy the center. That center needs to be empty in order for the cars to go on the other side. I believe, in a sense, that transience is precisely this. I mean, it's a limit, but in the same time, it allows history, for instance, to go to become natural, and at the same time nature to become historical. So it's some sort of I think this would be ideal. I think there are several consequences of this of the point Adorno makes that are very important. History and nature are both processes. History expresses qualitative change and rapid change, while nature tends to embody repetition and slow change. And also very important, I believe, nature is not a substrate for history, since these two realms constantly interact. I think this I will go back to this idea later on. In the same text, but also in others, of course, Adorno says that there is an underlying ideological tendency to turn history into nature, what of course Hegel and Lukács call second nature. The fact that historical products appear as timeless entities. I think you are familiarized with the concept, so I don't have to stay too much here. But we can see this kind of ideological tendency of masking, of trying to hide this kind of transience that Adorno mentioned there, by looking at how modernity views or approaches temporality or history. For instance, we have progress as a fundamental category that comes with capitalist modernity, in which we can see this kind of naturalizing tendency, in the sense that progress is such an example of an ascending temporality turned into nature or necessity. Many authors in 19th century, not only 19th century, tended to transform progress in some sort of necessary process. Okay, and this is the naturalized. Here we can see the naturalizing tendency. Of course, however, progress has still some sort of tension. I mean, this is important for Adorno, because despite this kind of naturalizing tendency, there is this tension between the possibility of a future emancipation and the present reality. So progress is not entirely, an ideological category, and that's why he will try later on in other parts of his work to recuperate progress. The same goes for regress. Of course, here he mentions also, he even analyzes also Spengler, who was famous after the First World War with the decline of the West. But here, of course, the problem is that regress becomes a necessity as well. Instead of progress, we now have a regress. And here, the tension, however, is another one, namely, is not about a future emancipation, but between the awareness of human fragility, of our own limits, and also present reality. So a regress is also recuperated by Adorno together with progress in a very bizarre mix. Okay, what is also very important, I believe, is that according to Adorno, the dialectics between history and nature is inescapable. So once we try to absolutize, for instance, history or human temporality, this will turn into turns into nature or necessity. So there is this kind of correlation between our tendency, for instance, to naturalize one pole, in this case, history, and this will create, of course, the ideological tendency to naturalize the other human history. Also, according to him, the naturalization of history can also be at the root of social explosions. So he gives this example uses the example of French Revolution. He believes that the Ancien regime, because of its rigidity, of its very rigid structure, also created this kind of violent explosion, to overcome it. And I will simply quote here, Adorno has this in which he basically wants to say that we cannot understand history or temporality without, in the same time, nature or something that is more fixed. And you have it here. Historical dynamic cannot be conceived as a dynamic tout simple, but as one in union with its opposite, with something fixed, which alone makes it possible to read a dynamic in the first place. Now, I had this introduction because it was about creating the context for acceleration as such, and I will try to talk now about the capitalist compulsion I was mentioning a few minutes ago. So Adorno, of course, is in a sense impacted. His ideas are shaped by the Marxist legacy. In the Communist Manifesto, we know Marx and Engels describe capitalism as the only social system constantly revolutionizing the forces of production. Later on, Georg Lukács analyzes, the ideological superstructure that distracts us from the capitalist exploitative dynamics by projecting this image of a inert and frozen universe, bourgeois universe. According to Adorno, Marx, however, could not predict the combination between technological acceleration and the intensification of the process of concentration and of bureaucratization. This is a quote from Adorno. So basically, Adorno says that what we need is to mix Marx with Max Weber. Why is that? Because the state becomes a hugely important actor. Not only, I mean, capitalism cannot be understood without this powerful presence of a bureaucratic state that emerges at the end of 19th century. In negative dialectics, Adorno says that human history might be grasped in terms of the dialectical relationship between the unfoldment and unleashing of productive forces. Negative dialectics, page 306. So what he understands by unfoldment, the unfoldment covers the relatively slow progress of technology, which leave social relations mostly undisturbed, while the unleashing expresses the acceleration of forces of production which enter into a conflict with the existing social forms. So basically, what is interesting is that Adorno believes that capitalism actually normalizes this conflict, the conflict between this unleashing of the forces of production and, of course, the existing social forms. So, and I quote here, although it is only an element of dialectics, the unleashing of production becomes once becomes a fetish, becomes an end in itself in capitalism. This intensification or unleashing of technology, of force of production, also has cultural effects. He has several reflections on this. I can give you two of them. For instance, when he mentions Kant's metaphor of truth as an island in the ocean, he says this objectively characterizes the Robinson Crusoe style of the ivory tower, just as the dynamics of productive forces was quick enough to destroy the idyll in which the petty bourgeoisie, rightly suspicious of dynamics, would have liked to linger. Or when turning to Hegel, Adorno notices the fury of destruction. As I remember, this is from Hegel, the fury of destruction characterizing the tendency of the absolute spirit to rapidly collapse old positions into new ones. And this is actually, for Adorno, is already a symptom of the emerging capitalist society. So a capitalist society marked by dynamism. Now, I would now try to focus on what I mentioned at some point, namely on the concept of compulsion. I think this is important, an important concept. And of course, this concept also needs to be related to the concept of gesture, another very important concept in Adorno's philosophy. This concept also is sometimes related to concepts like addendum or impulse or things like that. Gesture for Adorno is also a crossing point between abstract thinking and concrete objects. Is, I would say, a non-identical moment trying to differentiate and also relate mind and matter. So gesture is an important concept, even philosophically, in Adorno's work. What is interesting, however, is that according to Adorno, monopoly capitalism means the transition from gestures to gesticulations or compulsion. And he gives many examples here. I mean, when he tries to uncover, and here we go a bit to social pathology, when he tries to offer a critique of ideology in the case of Wagner, but also Hitler. I mean, gesticulation is a fundamental critical concept, or gesticulation or compulsion. I will give here only a brief example concerning Wagner. According to Adorno, Wagner is interesting because he articulates his musing around the composer's, I quote here, gesture of striking. Basically, according to him, this gesture of striking is an attempt on Wagner's attempt to, in a sense, subdue the public, to make the public passive. He compares Beethoven with Wagner here, while Beethoven uses gestures only intermittently in a multi-dimensional and oscillatory movement reminiscent of Hegelian dialectics. Wagner's transformed them into a central moment of his musical composition, resulting in the repetition of neutral, empty gestures, which, according to Adorno, signal the impossibility of any qualitative change. So basically, Wagner is by using this kind of, repetitive gestures, strikings. I mean, all these are actually a sign, according to Adorno, that nothing will happen, that temporality that we can find, for instance, in Beethoven's works is replaced by spatiality. Of course, if you allow me to give a very crude example in our society, we can think about this kind of repetitive injunctions when we look at television, or we see breaking news all the time. It's this kind of repetitive patterns in which everything seems about the end of the world, and actually is not, of course. It's simply another news. So there are many things, other things to talk about compulsion. I don't have the time, so I'm a bit pressed now to simply move on. I have here a quote from Adorno. It's a long one. I will not read it the whole one, but I think one part is important. He talks about the images of progress in bourgeois industrialism, and he says that what seems paradoxical is that these imagos grow old, and that anything new should ever make its appearance at all, given that technology ensures that the eternal sameness of the exchange principle is intensified to the point where repetition prevails throughout the sphere of production. So the life process, he says, itself freezes into immobility in the expression of eternal sameness. So what we have in this capitalist society, in which intensification seems to be central, is this kind of combination between shock effects and, in the same time, the idea, what Rosa at some point said, this kind of inertia, polar inertia. But for me, this is also important, because if we go back to the dialectics between history and nature, what we can see here is that capitalist social acceleration cannot escape these dialectics. So basically, the intensification of forces of production generates an almost complete naturalization of this movement, projecting the illusion of a complete stasis. So I believe that we can understand acceleration and intensification from Adorno's perspective only if we understand these dialectics, and the fact that intensification also creates this kind of naturalization, or this kind of illusion of a complete stasis. Okay, and I'm almost done. I think Gašper will be proud of me. I mean, I'm trying to to keep up with his demands.
I think we still have enough time, so you can.
Yeah, but it seems that I was rushing, and I will finish earlier than.
You can go with the full quote, Go.
So let me briefly talk about. I was saying that I will provide a case study, namely climate change. You have here an image that, in a sense, talks about acceleration. How temperatures rise from starting in 1850, and I will not stay here, because actually these are quotes from NASA. Certifying that climate change is climate warming and climate change is real, and is created by humans. So at least we are clear about that. We are not proposing a conspiracy theory. So what is interesting from my point of view when we look at climate change, well, it is okay. Before going to that, let me mention here a book, Freedom in the Anthropocene, written by Alexander Stirner and Anthony Melatopoulos, who already tried to understand Adorno's work as being some sort of theoretical reaction to what they call great acceleration of capitalist production and consumption after the Second World War, that were at the origin that created, shaped, generated the contemporary ecological crisis. So Adorno was already, I mean, this relationship between Adorno and ecological crisis was already addressed not only by Stoner and Melatopoulos, but by many others. So there is a growing literature on this, academic literature on this point. But what is interesting for me here is that climate change constitutes the result of a highly complex relationship between society and nature. And of course, acceleration is also a feature of this change, because we know this change is accelerating, and we risk at this point to reach a tipping point that might become irreversible for us and for humanity. So I believe that because of if you look at climate change and we try to understand this phenomenon, we have to accept that we have to take into account the relationship between humans and nature, the fact that there is this kind of profound and very complex, intricate relationship between us and human nature. And I really believe that Adorno's dialectical approach can give us some important theoretical tools in understanding this. My point here is that for Adorno, and this is I think important, nature is not a substrate for history. So for him, you cannot simply ignore or suspend nature. You have to take nature and try to understand how nature always interacts with our human world. And climate change is, in a sense, the very, if you want, expression of this intricate relationship between us and the human in the natural world. We know that for Adorno, natural environment has been subjected to constant violence from the very origins of human society, and because of this, society itself became naturalized and ideologically rigidified. But I think, in the same time, climate change is also interesting because it goes beyond Adorno. Adorno could not anticipate this, simply because he was living in a time when nature was not a problem. Actually, the capitalist production and the consumption did not create ecological effects in the 1950s, 60s. So he couldn't envision this. So if you look around, if you think about climate change, what is striking for us is that this climate change is not only about ideology, like Adorno might have thought, but also about concrete material effects. Climate change is, I would say, the expression of a more literal dialectical comeback, because the attempt to submit inorganic nature threatens to literally destroy human society. So climate change, in a sense, can be tackled with some of the tools provided by Adorno, but at the same time, we need to go beyond Adorno, I would say. And now I reach some conclusions. I will try to briefly compare Adorno and Rosa, and I believe the results are mixed. I believe, in the first place, that Rosa offers a much more sophisticated account of the various forms of social acceleration than Adorno. Often Adorno's approach is too global, too undifferentiated. When he talks about nature and history, of course, he also tries to give, I mean, he was sensitive to this. I mean, he tries to root his analysis also in historical context, but still his concepts are in a sense too large. And for instance, he's not interested in various forms of acceleration in capitalist society as Rosa is. So he talks in much more global terms, and this is a problem. Rosa, of course, does not need to relate this is the second point, his analysis with almost ontological reflections. I know we might enter in another debate here with his Adorno's quasi-ontological reflections on the relationship between nature and history, because basically Rosa, I would say, and this goes us to the third point, has what I would call a society-centric approach. When he tries to analyze acceleration, he does it from a sociologist point of view. He tries to look at society and try to see the tendencies, social factors that intersect in order to produce social acceleration. So he is focused on society, as very almost all sociologists are, while Adorno offers us a different approach, namely one in which we cannot be centered only on society. We have to think this relationship between society and nature. And I think here Adorno is better equipped to account for climate change, because climate change once again is about this mix between the natural and the social. And the last point, I also think that Adorno can give us more insights in a much more sophisticated approach to critique of ideology. I mean, and to a much more sophisticated account to address the ideological effects of climate change. For instance, like I would say denialism, fatalism, or passivity that this phenomenon can generate. I will stop here. Hopefully this was interesting for you. I'm a bit tired, so sorry for accelerating, decelerating. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciprian. I think this was a really, really, really interesting talk. I'm very pleased at what has been just shown to us. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. And of course, now Ciprian will, even though you are tired, Ciprian, you still need to answer some questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah. So I think I think we are right now. I don't think we really need to stretch this any longer. I think we should start with questions. Before you think of some, I will take my host right to ask the first question, because but otherwise, as usual, whenever you have any questions, just raise your voice or give me some kind of sign, like like a reaction here on Zoom. And in the second part, we will also see if there's any question on the Facebook. So yeah, it's pretty much a standard fare, which we are all very well used to, or should be by now. So Ciprian, you know what my question will be somehow, or no, maybe no, but no. I actually really pleased that you started with this line, because it's really interesting. I was actually really intrigued by this comparison between Adorno and of course the relatively new sociological theory of social acceleration, simply because I did think in similar terms, however, more in the line of course, Adorno's critique, or a question of history of progress later, and of course the question of reification, which doesn't feature as much in Adorno as it does elsewhere. So I have actually a couple of questions, so which I will try to put into one really big, really mother of a question. So the first one is, I was immediately reminded on this, basically on this line, which we could say the problem of say historical nature. What you talked about in Adorno's little book or treatise, which I'm not so familiar with, I must admit. Here, of course, I can immediately think of Kant's third antinomy with considerations from Hegel, where history features as freedom, and of course Adorno's critique of dialectical mediation of history. However, I'm not sure if this, while this is a very specific treatise on this, what I would be more interested in is how if you could see how this would feature in the later, to say, tries or later examples of this Hegelian line of thinking of progress as kind of this realization of freedom, as kind of realization of to say, this even unnatural exponential growth, which kind of makes it better altogether. So here I'm thinking, for example, on a freedom's right of from Hornet, which kind of features the idea of social acceleration, but he never considers it as kind of a social pathology. So this is why I was quite intrigued by what you said, and I think he actually has a discussion with Hartmut Rosa where they do touch on Adorno before. So I'm thinking, can you perhaps say a bit? Can for example even this be similar in this Adornian critic would go against the similar against this examples of Hegelian way of thinking of this exponential progress, which obviously isn't as in your account. And the second small question, which does completely align with this, is I was actually thinking of pathology of verification more than for example when you said, for example, social acceleration is a social pathology. However, I don't see that this is a right term for it. I mean, the pathology is a really problematic term in Frankfurt School. I mean, for any scholar of Frankfurt School, because it really it's to say the problem, of course, is on two levels. First is that you need kind of an optimal state, and obviously this is a very hard thing to do if you don't go into kind of this normative questioning like enforced or Habermas. And on the other hand, the problem with pathologists is that sometimes it's just the question of difference between misdevelopments of society and pathologies. So I'm not sure that this is, for example, really pathology as much as it is, as you said, in between, you know, and you didn't continue that kind of like a breeding ground for pathologists. So I'm a bit confused as far as the title of your talk goes, actually. Say a little bit more, because usually, you know, I would consider it in a way of, I don't know, maybe the second generation of Frankfurt School would say something like, say, I don't know, rational or some kind of the problem of instrumental realization or something like that, you know. So yeah, this would be my two questions, which are basically connected. And
Okay. Thank you, Gašper. I hope I can answer them. Concerning Hegel, it's in a very interesting relationship that Adorno has with Hegel. I didn't go that far in this presentation. So on one hand, I mean, according to Adorno, Hegel, or the absolute spirit, Hegel's absolute spirit, is in a sense the expression of early capitalism emerging in Western world. And this idea of double negation that the absolute spirit is defined by is also, I would say, for Adorno, an expression of a liberal type of capitalism in which negativity is still very much present. I mean, it's visible. I mean, what happens, however, is with monopoly capitalism, according to Adorno, is that this negativity tends to be erased. I gave the example of Wagner, in which capitalism manages to, in a sense, you know, get rid of this kind of tensions, or tries to naturalize or ideologize the entire society. Concerning what you said there, I mean, this idea, the developmental logic behind the Hegelian dialectics and this kind of ascending logic, right? And Adorno's own approach. One problem that Adorno has with Hegel, of course, is the fact that the double negation itself. For Adorno, in my reading at least, I believe that for Adorno, ideology is basically double negation. So is the attempt to mask, and we can already find that in Hegel, to mask the tension between universality and particularity. And he tries to avoid that, and he tries to offer a mix, Adorno, in which you have both progress and regress. So he tries to recuperate the idea of progress, but in the same time, he also tries to inject this kind of more skeptical, this more skeptical attitude in which we are aware of our own fragility and our own limitation, so that we don't end up like Hegel in this kind of I don't know, hegemony of identity in history, something like that. I'm not entirely sure that I answered the first question, but I don't think that I can do better than this. Concerning pathology, I have once again to admit I didn't think too much. I mean, I gave this title, but uh, I didn't think about pathology, and I should have done it in a more coherent manner. I didn't try to. I only look at the surface, and of course, pathology can be viewed very. I mean, can be very nuanced and sophisticated, and that's my mistake because I, in a sense, created false expectations. So I cannot really. I don't want to speculate too much because I think it would be wrong. So I would simply say I don't have. Your question is perfectly legitimate, but that's my mistake. I created this false expectation about social pathology. So, for instance, you take Adorno. Of course, for Adorno, capitalism. I talked about compulsions and gesticulations and all this kind of tendency to control even our innermost reflexes and biological processes like gestures. And of course this has a pathological side for Adorno. This is obvious, but I wouldn't go more than that. I mean, I would stop here, Gašper. Sorry for that. We'll have a discussion in another context about this. Okay.
No, don't worry. I think you didn't mistake, or you didn't make a mistake on any kind of say expectation. I think it would be actually a good question on where actually ideology features, if it is a social pathology. And I think that's really a problematic thing to say. That I mean, to put Adorno in the same sense as social pathology. That's just my thought, but it doesn't matter. So yeah, now this was my part, which with which I did bother our guest a bit. Now it's your turn, so please, you're very well invited to ask any kind of questions you have. I think this was a really interesting, really pertinent talk. So please.
Can I ask something?
Of course, Igor.
Yeah. Thank you for your lecture. Well, it's a big question about your one of the last remarks. You compared Adorno and Rosa, and the promising fruitfulness of their approaches to climate change. And you said that in this respect, Adorno is a bit more promising because Rosa remains at sociological level and Adorno is going beyond. Well, this is questionable if we take into account the second big work of Rosa, Resonance from 2016, Polity Press 2019 English. And in this book, Rosa is offering, this is literally says, sociology and philosophy of relationships with the world. And if you think about three axes in the resonance, you have horizontal, diagonal, and vertical, which is to the world as totality, in Karls Jaspers Umgebung und so weiter. And in this light, you might be right concerning social acceleration, but concerning resonance, I think this is not well-grounded claim. Thank you. I'd like to hear your comment.
Yeah, I think I agree with your comment, actually. I have to admit I didn't read Resonance. I know about it. I read some text about it. But if you put it like this, I think you're right. I mean, I only focus on social acceleration, and that's why I missed this part.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was, of course, Professor Bojan Žalec. Thank you for your comment. Now, anyone else? I think this is really pertinent, really actual topic. So perhaps if you have any questions, how could this be regarded in comparison to today's society? You're very much welcome. So, yeah. Darko's trying his, of course, question. So, Darko, please.
Yeah, well, I found your lecture interesting also from one different aspect. Since when we talk about Adorno or critical theory in general and so on, we usually don't see the topic of relationship between nature and history as a central topic of this philosophy. I think what you exposed here, also in view of these newer interpretations and whatever it is, discussions of different positions within critical theory, I think that your point is important in view of seeing the critical theory and of course, in particularly Adorno, as probably the strongest mind in this circle, this theory is still complete enough to be inspirational, or how to say, one of these philosophical contributions which could not be left out when we try to interpret the world with which we are confronted now. And in this view, I think that you made a point that relating to the ecology, or to the crisis that we are having now with nature and so on, that critical theory represents also a link in the philosophical thinking which brings us to the problem, and we could have not understood this problem good enough without this contribution also of a critical theory, although we don't think that critical theory was so concentrated on this problem. But I think this is probably sort of a byproduct of the whole process from Descartes to the modern, to the contemporary times, you know. And I think that especially in Adorno, there is another dimension of this problem, which we can find in his thematization of the topic of the subjectivity or subject, you know. Because his subject is always somehow determined by history and so on. And in that view, I would also look for the answer to the Gašper's question concerning social pathology. Well, that's just
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's an interesting point, and maybe here I can also address partially Gašper's question, because Professor Darko Strain said that we also have to take into account subjectivity, and of course one of Adorno's famous ideas was that the subject needs to remember that he's also nature, that he has a body, that he's related to nature through his body. And what is interesting when thinking about the ecological crisis, trying to think about this example, I also think about, I said in my presentation that ecology, in a sense, is a more literal comeback of dialectics, because it actually has material effects. It's not only about ideology. But this is not entirely true when we think about Adorno, because in Adorno, there is a comeback, some sort of natural comeback, if you think about the reactions of the body to ideology. I mean, he was, of course, impressed by Freud and by psychoanalysis, and he knew that ideology has bodily, I mean, shapes our feelings, our gestures. So it can put pressure on it. It can distort us, if you want.
Maybe the notion of incorporation can come into play here, which you can find, for instance, I don't know, in Bourdieu and others.
So
theology, okay.
So that was basically my point. My point is that there was also, if I try to go further on this, there was also a reaction, not only an ideological reaction, but also a natural reaction through our body. But Adorno did not think about the inorganic nature as being capable of this kind of comeback that we see with the ecological crisis. So that was something that I should have been more specific. But thank you for your observation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we still have a few minutes, so I still invite you, because this is a really good opportunity to to ask the question for this for our really esteemed guest. And you're just we'll just give you maybe a minute or two to maybe recuperate a bit after this, and maybe
I think there is a question.
Okay. So, can you just is it you, Andrei? I don't see. Well, sorry, Andrei. Can you unmute yourself?
Again muted. Once again, thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. Here, I have only, I can agree in roughly with how your presentation. I only have a question about the last point of your totally at the end of your presentation, namely, how can we focus together at the same time on the social and natural aspects of accelerations? I haven't any clear idea about that. I feel it is necessary, especially if we try to transcend ecological crisis. But what does it mean? And the second question is, I suspect we have to, at the same time, also together connect the aspects of de-acceleration or deceleration in nature and in history. And also together. And this, how to do this, what kind of processes of social, historical processes enable that? I ask you if you have some idea about
that. Okay, let me use a bit Adorno here, but concerning deceleration, actually you are perfectly right. I mean, there is a growing discussion about, for instance, degrowth. You know, the idea that we should envision another type of society in which growth is no longer, you know, the basic mobilizing factor, and that's for me is very important. It seemed at some point that this pandemic might make us rethink this whole capitalist society, but I'm afraid it's not the case. Actually, everyone, I mean, looks for growing their GDP. Everyone is with the eye on economy, and I'm a bit skeptical, concerning this possibility. But I really believe, I mean, if I go back to Adorno, I might agree with him in a sense, that I think Adorno tries to say that what we should do, even though he's a bit vague, of course, he's vague in many parts, and he might be a bit contradictory. At some point, he seems to favor some sort of balance between acceleration or intensification and some sort of slowing down. So we have to balance this. And if we think about his dialectics, it might work. I mean, this idea might be the most, I mean, might be acceptable for us, readers of Adorno. In other parts of his work, he believes that an emancipated society is one in which we basically no longer have this kind of drive towards intensification. It's a society in which we simply enjoy life as such without having this kind of drive to overcome or to have this kind of to entering this kind of intensifying process. Now, okay, this is Adorno. If you want my opinion, I of course I'm very I'm undecided at this point. But what I know, I really believe in, is that this type of society based on constant growth is not tenable on the medium and the long run. It's obviously harming us, and this actually is destroying us. So we have to rethink the whole model. That's for sure. So I believe Adorno might also be important, even though it's not very clarified and it's not very clearly articulated, but at least he addressed capitalism as a system. And the problem, and one of the basic problem of the system is, once again, this kind of drive towards profit that it's eating us alive. So we have to rethink this social model. That's obvious for me. And how we can do that, that's so complex. I mean, I don't have a clue. Degrowth might give us something, but I have to admit, I don't have too much, too many ideas on this point.
Thank you, both of you. Maybe the first thing we need to do is to look at our cryptocurrency market and then perhaps think about the gold situation a little bit. No, I actually fully agree with all these concerns, and I think the question of say this Hegelian progress that we said, boy, this actually has some really inspiring answers with social acceleration. So the question of progression isn't necessary, of course, just equated to the question of process as such. So okay, maybe one more question. I think we still have time. I still see a lot of candidates that could put us a good question, like Tomasz or someone else. So if you have any other question, this is your last chance, because our guest is tired. So
no, it's okay. I don't want to use this excuse anymore. So just shoot the questions.
Well invited. If you still have any questions, I think we're still quite. I think we're still quite on time. So
you could have told me to present in 1 hour, and it would have been fine. I would have slowed down my presentation, and no, didn't have time for questions. So.
Well, if there's nothing else, then I think we'll go slowly to the conclusion. I think this was a really fun, really interesting evening. I was extremely happy that I managed to get Ciprian to present something for us. He definitely is a scholar that I feel can still I don't know, reach quite highly in today's academia, and I think this was a really good presentation, a really interesting one, really pertinent one, as I already said. And I'm really looking forward to what I will read from him, and of course to our other events that we will have. There will be a lot of them, because we will basically have an event every 2 weeks, or more or less. The next one is it will be organized by Katja Utrosha, and we will talk about philosophy of music, which I think is a really interesting and a bit kind of a topic that isn't really featured as frequently, of course, as we'd like. So I think it's something new and it's really quite exciting. And then the next time after that, we have another esteemed guest from USA, Russell Goodman. Stay with us, stay tuned. We still have lots of interesting things to show you until June. And in June, we still you will hear soon enough about what will happen in June. But until June, be prepared for at least, say, 1 or 2 events per month. This one is finished. I thank you very much again. I thank. I also give. I will also give thanks again for anyone who showed us support with membership and everything else that comes with it. We will probably start with live events as soon as possible. They will still be in Truba de Vahisha Literature, but they will also be broadcast via Zoom, via Facebook, as these are. So bear with us if something goes a bit wrong the first time. I mean, from a technical standpoint, because we are philosophers after all. We still, even though we live in an era of say this accelerated social acceleration. So thank you again, Ciprian. Before we conclude our evening, I would like to, as usually, I always like to give the last word to the guests. So I would like to give you a last word, maybe something you didn't say before, or something you wish to, I don't know, whatever.
I will not say anything about being tired. It was an honor. I really hope it was stimulating enough for you. So it was really a pleasure and an honor. So hopefully we will meet again. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, goodbye everyone, and see you next time.